My name is Evelyn Grace Hart, and I'm 62 years old. I spent 35 of those years designing structures meant to outlast storms, bridges, schools, hospitals, anything that needed a spine of steel. People used to say I was built the same way. I thought so too, until this morning. Now I stand inside the glass haven, a cathedral of light overlooking the Puget Sound, where my daughter's wedding is about to begin. The air hums with strings and chatter. Roses line the aisles like veins in a body that no longer needs me. The manager approaches with a clipboard pressed to his chest. Polite but urgent. "Mrs. Hart," he says, "we just need the owner's signature before we can start." For a second, I think I misheard him. Then I see it printed in neat block letters above the line. Owner of premises Evelyn G. Hart. My name, my signature, my land. 3 hours ago. That same name was removed from the guest list. The wedding planner called while I was drinking my first coffee. Her tone was sweet. "Rehearsed, Mrs. Hart. I'm calling on behalf of Madison and the Whitmore family. They've decided to reduce attendance. Your family's invitation has been canceled. The deposit, of course, is non-refundable. $200,000. My gift, my silence." Through the glass wall, I can see Madison now radiant, laughing, unaware that the building she stands in still belongs to me. Her fiancé's family surrounds her, pearls and pressed suits gleaming under the atrium lights. They think they've built a perfect picture, polished to hide its cracks. The manager clears his throat. "Ma'am." The pen feels heavier than it should. My hand trembles not from weakness, but from the weight of everything that led here. I could sign and let the music play, or I could hold the truth steady, just once, and let it echo louder than the vows they're about to speak. I place the pen on the clipboard, the way you might set down a hammer after the last strike, and say quietly, "The ceremony won't begin yet." Outside, the violins falter. Inside, the glass hums with silence. 3 hours earlier, the phone had rung. The morning began like any other gray light filtering through the kitchen windows. The kettle whistling on the stove. I had just folded the newspaper when my phone rang. The caller ID read Azure Events, the company my daughter had raved about for months. I smiled, expecting a question about linens or music licensing. Instead, a voice as smooth as marble greeted me. "Mrs. Hart," she said, measured and distant. "I'm calling on behalf of Madison and the Whitmore family. They've decided to make some final adjustments to the guest list for tomorrow's ceremony. Unfortunately, your family's invitation has been canceled. The deposit, of course, remains in place. At first, I thought she'd made a mistake. I'm sorry, what did you say? I understand this may come as a surprise." She continued, every syllable rehearsed. "But the decision has been finalized. The couple sends their warmest regards, warmest regards." 2 words polished to hide the knife behind them. I stayed quiet long enough for her to ask, "Mrs. Hart, are you still there?" "I am," I said. My voice came out even. Too calm, like an engineer calculating load stress while the structure groans. "Please confirm this cancellation came directly from my daughter." "Yes, ma'am," from Ms. Madison Hart herself. Something inside me shifted, an almost physical snap, like a joint gone out of place. After the call ended, I kept the phone in my hand. It was still warm, as if it remembered her voice better than I did. The house felt suddenly larger, hollow. On the counter sat a stack of wedding proofs I'd paid for menus, floral sketches, invoices marked paid in full. Outside, the rain began in thin, steady lines against the glass. I watched it trace paths down the window until one drop split into 2. I whispered into the quiet room. "Then whose family am I now?" The kettle screamed again on the stove. the sound thin and distant. I turned it off, but the ringing stayed in my ears. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, scattered like dust. No one bothered to sweep away. 2 weeks before the call, Madison stopped answering my texts about the seating chart. "The planners have it under control," she'd said, her voice bright but clipped. The kind of tone people use when they're halfway out the door. When I offered to help with the dress fitting, she promised to circle back soon, though she never did. That night, scrolling through my phone, I found a photo someone had tagged her in bridal tea at the Whitmore's estate. Madison stood between her future in-laws, smiling like she'd been born into their world. The caption read, "Family is everything." I stared at it for a long time, at the pearls around her neck, the hand of her fiancé's mother resting possessively on her shoulder. There was no place for me in that frame. I tried to remember the last time Madison had called just to talk. Maybe it was last winter, when she needed the down payment for her apartment. Or maybe before that, when she'd asked me to review her fiancé's business lease. Always practical, always polite, never personal. Somewhere between the invoices and the congratulations, we'd stopped being mother and daughter. The house creaked in the afternoon wind, and I found myself thinking back to a different kind of silence, the one on construction sites at 3 a.m. When the concrete was setting, and the only sound was the slow hiss of the curing lamps. Madison used to sleep on a cot in the office corner while I marked blueprints under a single bulb. She'd draw on scrap paper with my drafting pencils, little stick figures holding hands under crooked rooftops. I missed birthdays and recitals, but I kept the lights on and her world standing. Every beam I raised, every nail I hammered was a promise she'd never feel the fear of something collapsing around her. Now, looking at that photograph, I wondered when she stopped noticing the steel beneath her feet, or when she decided she didn't need it anymore. Sleep never came that night. The rain had stopped, but the house still sounded hollow, as if every wall had learned to echo. I got up before dawn and made tea I didn't drink, then wandered into the study where I kept my old project files. The drawers still smelled faintly of cedar and blueprint ink, the scent of my former life measurements, contracts, load-bearing dreams. I pulled out the thick folder labeled The Glass Haven. Madison had chosen it for her wedding because it was modern yet timeless. She didn't know that the building's first design sketches were drawn by my late husband, Daniel, back when it was just a community art pavilion after he died. I finished the structure myself and transferred its lease under our small LLC Heartstone Projects to keep his name alive. The folder was heavy with documents, land surveys, tax statements, maintenance agreements. Halfway through, I found the current contract Azure Events rental agreement. My eyes traced the fine print until they caught on a sentence highlighted in soft yellow, clause 12.4. Owner's live signature required for final event authorization. Owner. Live signature. I felt the pulse in my neck. The account number listed for the deposit belonged to my personal trust, the one Daniel and I had built for long-term holdings. Madison hadn't noticed, or maybe she hadn't cared. To her, I was just the source of funds, not the foundation beneath the facade. I sat back, the paper trembling between my fingers. Somewhere along the way, I had given up my voice for her comfort, my authority for her approval. But here, buried in the contracts, was a quiet truth. The ground they were standing on literally and legally was still mine. Outside, the first hint of daylight brushed the glass windows, turning their reflections pale and sharp. I thought of Daniel, the way he used to say, "A structure is only as strong as the hands that poured its base." For the first time in months, my breath came steady. The pen was no longer a relic of loss. It was a lever small, simple, and capable of shifting everything. By noon, the city had dried. The clouds broke into thin white bands drifting over the bay, and for the first time in 2 days, sunlight found its way through my kitchen window. I was still sitting at the table, surrounded by papers. When the phone rang again, this time a familiar voice. It was Margaret, my late husband's sister. The kind of woman who collected family news like seashells harmless, until you realized how sharp the edges were. I heard about the change of plans, she said gently, though curiosity hummed behind every syllable. Evelyn, I thought you'd be at the rehearsal dinner tonight. Apparently not, I replied, keeping my tone even. I wasn't invited. There was a pause long enough to hear her exhale. You didn't hear this from me, she said, lowering her voice. But Daniel's old friend Thomas is close with the Whitmores. He told me they felt you were a bit, how did he put it, too visible, too working class for the tone they wanted. They said it might make the press photos look, well, inconsistent with the family's image. The words hit quietly, like stones dropped in deep water. So, I said, I'm off-brand. I'm sorry, dear. Madison's under a lot of pressure. The Whitmores have a very particular reputation. Everything has to look effortless. I thanked her and hung up. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark window, calloused hands, faint tan lines from years on construction sites, silver hair pulled back with a pencil still tucked behind my ear. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who had built her life with her own hands. Anger came first, sharp and clean, but pity followed, heavier, slower. Not for myself, but for Madison, for the child who once danced barefoot on unfinished floors, tracing beams of sunlight through scaffolding, proud to be her father's daughter. Somewhere along the line, she had learned that love came with conditions, polish, distance, erasure. I gathered the papers into a neat stack. They had mistaken class for worth. They would learn the difference soon enough. By morning, the city had settled into that strange stillness that comes before a storm, air too calm, light too bright. I drove downtown to meet Richard Lawson, an old friend from my engineering days who'd traded drafting tables for legal briefs years ago. He was waiting at a cafe near the courthouse, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, his expression the kind reserved for complicated blueprints and moral puzzles. You still own the venue, he said after scanning the documents I'd brought. The land trust, the LLC, even the maintenance clause. Everything flows back to you, Evelyn. I watched his pen tap the margin near clause 12.4. But here's the part that concerns me. They're filing something called an emergency waiver. If the county office approves it before the ceremony starts, they can proceed without your live signature. My stomach tightened. How long do I have? He checked his watch. Less than an hour, maybe 45 minutes. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, carrying crates of flowers toward the harbor. I imagined them roses, lilies, hundreds of blooms heading to the glass haven to decorate a wedding built on borrowed ground. Richard leaned forward. You don't have to make this ugly. If you sign, no one will ever know. If you don't, he stopped, then sighed. You'll stop the wedding cold, and she'll never forgive you. I nodded slowly. He was right about one thing. The decision wasn't about pride. It was about truth. After he left, I sat there for a long time. The contract spread open between my hands. I traced the familiar header, Heartstone Projects LLC, the name Daniel and I had once dreamed would outlive us. The clock on my phone blinked 11:12. The ceremony was set for noon. I stood, folded the papers into my bag, and walked out into the brilliant sunlight. My hands trembled as I reached for the car keys, but not from fear. For the first time in years, the path ahead felt clear, not easy, not kind, but clear. The drive to the glass haven felt shorter than it ever had. Maybe it was the way the morning sun struck the steel facade, turning the building into a mirror that refused to lie. I parked in the side lot, where no one would think twice about seeing an older woman with a clipboard and a steady purpose. Inside, the air buzzed with controlled chaos. Florists carried armfuls of roses. Voices tangled in urgent whispers about color palettes and symmetry. Waitstaff polished glassware beneath chandeliers I had once approved for installation. Every corner held my fingerprints, every seam, every pane. No one recognized me. To them, I was another contractor, another anonymous figure making sure the illusion stayed flawless. I walked the perimeter, touching the cold edge of a support beam hidden behind draped silk. Beneath the elegance, the structure hummed with quiet strength. My strength. I could still see Daniel sketching those very joints in our dining room, insisting that a building should breathe like a living thing. Near the stage, a young planner was adjusting the archway of flowers. She looked up briefly and smiled. Final inspection. The manager said someone was coming. That's right, I replied softly. One last walkthrough. The orchestra began tuning in the distance, the first notes of the processional floating like threads through glass. My heart matched their rhythm, slow, steady, inevitable. Then the manager approached, clipboard in hand, breathless from hurrying. Oh, excuse me, ma'am. We just need the final authorization before we can begin. He turned the form toward me. At the bottom, beside a neat line for signature, was the title, Owner of Premises. I took the pen. The ink shimmered under the skylight. Through the tall glass walls, I could see the guests beginning to arrive, Madison in white, radiant, framed by people who had replaced me. For a moment, I thought I might still sign. It would be easy, painless, invisible. But then the sound of the orchestra deepened, and time itself seemed to hold its breath. I lowered the pen, steadying my hand against the clipboard. The owner's here, I said quietly. And she's not finished inspecting yet. The music swelled, then faltered. Somewhere beyond the atrium doors, the announcer's voice began introducing the families, his tone bright and oblivious. I could hear the rustle of gowns, the scrape of polished shoes. Everything was in motion, everything except me. The manager shifted beside me, uncertain. Ma'am, if you could just... I raised a hand. Stop the procession. He froze. Around us, the staff hesitated mid-stride, bouquets trembling in their hands. The planner, a woman with flawless hair and the voice of a silk curtain, hurried over, smiling through panic. Miss, whoever you are, we're about to start. If this is about paperwork, we can settle it later. This is the paperwork, I said, holding up the form, and I'm withdrawing my authorization. Clause 12.4, live owner signature required. Her eyes widened, the kind of realization that turns blood cold. You can't withdraw on the day of I can, I said, my tone even, almost gentle, and I am. The venue's use is hereby revoked due to violation of trust and misuse of funds. For a moment, the only sound was the echo of my words under glass. Then came the whispers, first from the staff, then from the guests filtering in through the open doors. Madison appeared at the far end of the aisle, confusion breaking across her face as she saw me. She rushed forward, her train brushing the floor like spilled light. Mom, what are you doing? Please, just sign it. They're waiting. I turned toward her. The orchestra had gone silent. Even the sea beyond the windows seemed to pause. You canceled your mother, I said quietly, to look perfect. I'm canceling the lie that made you forget who you are. Tears blurred the edge of her veil. I didn't move closer. I just placed the unsigned form on the table, the pen resting beside it. The microphones popped softly, and then, like a current cutting off, the speakers went dead. The wedding, the music, the illusion, all of it stopped at once. It was nearly midnight when I heard the knock. Slow, uncertain, the sound of someone who didn't know if they'd be welcomed. When I opened the door, Madison stood barefoot on the porch, mascara smudged, her wedding dress clinging to her in damp folds. The hem was streaked with dirt, the train twisted in her hands. She looked like a child who had run too far. "Can I come in?" she whispered. I stepped aside without speaking. The house was dim except for the kitchen light, the same one that had burned through every late night of her childhood. She set her shoes on the floor as though they might break, then leaned against the counter, shoulders shaking. "I can't believe you did that," she said. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. "In front of everyone." "I know. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" "They were all watching." "I imagine they were." I poured her a glass of water, but she didn't take it. Her anger came in waves. But beneath it was something smaller, sharper. "You ruined it, Mom. You always ruin things when they start going right." I waited until she met my eyes. "You mean when they start looking right?" Her mouth trembled, and for a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then the words slipped out. Small as a confession. "I didn't want them to see where I came from. They already think I married beneath them." The silence after that was longer than any argument. I sat down at the table and gestured for her to join me. "I was never trying to embarrass you, Madison," I said. "I just couldn't keep pretending something honest was a mistake. I worked so hard to give you a life without cracks, but I see now I built you a cage too." She covered her face with both hands. When she cried, it wasn't graceful or cinematic. It was the raw kind that empties a person out. I reached across the table, not to pull her close, but to steady the glass between us. We stayed that way, mother and daughter, quiet, shaking while the clock ticked toward morning. 3 weeks later, the scent of fresh paint and sawdust filled the glass haven again. The scaffolding was gone, the chandeliers polished, the flowers replaced by garlands of paper lanterns and string lights. The grand piano had been moved aside to make space for folding chairs. It wasn't the luxury venue the Whitmores once demanded. It was something smaller, humbler, and infinitely more alive. The new sign out front read, "No hidden fees, no hidden faces." Today's couple, a teacher and a mechanic, had saved for 2 years to afford a wedding. They couldn't pay for catering or a band, so the neighborhood brought potluck dishes, and an old Bluetooth speaker handled the music. It was imperfect, unpolished, and beautiful. Madison was there too, not in white this time, but in a plain blue dress, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She moved quietly among the guests, lighting candles, fixing tablecloths, refilling drinks when no one noticed. When our eyes met across the room, she smiled a small, steady smile that didn't need words to explain it. As the newlyweds shared their first dance, I stood near the window, watching the reflection of the lights ripple across the glass. Madison joined me, wiping her hands on a napkin still dusted with flour. "Looks different in here," she said softly. "It finally feels honest," I replied. We stood in silence, listening to the laughter, the music, the shuffle of feet on the worn wooden floor. The same beams Daniel once set his hands on carried the rhythm like a heartbeat. I leaned closer and whispered, "You can decorate a facade with gold, but if the foundation lies, it will always crack." Madison looked down at her hands, steady now, not shaking. "Then let's build better ones," she said. Outside, the night wind caught the new sign and made it sway gently against its chain. Inside, the room glowed with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't perfection or forgiveness, exactly. It was something stronger, something built to last.